Hi, this is Robert Shear with another edition of Sheer Intelligence, where the intelligence comes from my guest. In this case, Dr. Francis Gill, and who's a psychiatrist and works at this county hospital here in Los Angeles, part of the faculty at USC, and she's also interested in the rights of physicians and interns, and has been active in a committee of interns and residents, union organizing, and she's involved with the SEIU, which brings us really to the subject that I wanted to talk about. And as I think I mentioned, yes, the Democratic Socialist Alliance National Political Committee. But I really want to get as to what is happening in LA. You are a reputable, leading member of our community. You heal people, you don't hurt them, you worry about their getting more sensible and rational about their lives. And we seem to be in a period of madness. And
Mhm,
I want to take just one inflection point of it. Yes, we've had our actually one of our senators uh,
mhm,
handcuffed and pushed around, abused. My God, a historic moment. But I wanted to ask you about the case of David Huerta, who's the leader of SEIU, much respected here, even by our political leadership in LA, and treated in this horrible way, arrested, but using that as an example of the distemper of the moment. Uh,
mhm.
or madness. I don't have your professional ability to analyze madness, but it looks like we're going crazy here.
Yeah, yeah, I think in my professional opinion, we're going crazy here. That's accurate. Yeah, I mean, what's happening is really, really horrifying and out of control. I think the escalation, the ICE raids that started last Friday and have continued across LA for the last week, it's so escalatory, it's so horrifying, and it's so violent. I mean, just I can't even remember if this was yesterday or the day before, but we saw ICE agents ram a car in Boyle Heights, like drove through an intersection and rammed a car to stop the car and arrest someone that was at one of the protests. A car that, by the way, had a woman and a child in it. Um, and that's not an acceptable, rules of engagement seem to not apply here. It's not an acceptable way to go about whatever you're trying to do. Um, and I think, we've seen the community react appropriately to this kind of escalation. People are out in the streets, people are angry and upset. And yeah, I mean, but it's really horrifying. And unfortunately, it's not clear whether this is going to de escalate at any point soon. They're saying 30 days, maybe 60 days of raids. The National Guard remains under Trump's control. It's a very horrifying and scary moment, but it's also clear that they're trying to see how far that they can push this, how far they can push us, and people are standing up and fighting back and saying not this far. So I think that's a positive sign in this dark times.
Well, people throw around the ideas of fascism and so forth, uh, and really what you mean by that is not just an extreme right wing or whatever view of how life should be ordered, or a racist or a chauvinistic view based on hostility to a group, to the point of genocide, in the case of like Jewish people treated in by German fascism. But there's a theater to fascism that is, as you
Hmm.
indicated, deliberately terrifying. The
Yeah.
stormtroopers, the use of costumes, and when I saw the ICE people wrestling a U.S. senator to the ground and
Hmm.
intimidating. And I kept thinking, is this built into the logic of Trump, of Donald Trump? Because after all, he was a creation of Hollywood, almost like a caricature of the bully, and the
Hmm.
purpose, abusing people, challenging him, bold. And that's how he became famous, not as
Hmm.
a considerate, decent person, right? Worrying, or even a concerned lawyer or a doctor role model, but
Hmm.
on the contrary, uh, the bully. And now we have a government of bullying. And again, going to your profession, it seems a part of the population wants that bullying. It's the Eric Fromm, I think, wasn't a full psychiatrist as you are. I think he was a psychologist, but he wrote. I think he wrote "Escape from Freedom," and I remember the whole explanation of Germany is that people want a tyrant at some point, or at least some section of the population,
Mhm.
and they then have to victimize another section. In this case, it's undocumented workers. Okay,
Mhm.
it's people who don't have the right papers. And everyone here in this community, I don't care what their politics, knows we couldn't have the prosperity of California, the
Mhm.
ease of life, which in California, I believe, is now the third biggest economy, just as a state. We're the third biggest, most successful economy in the whole world. And part of that is agriculture, which always required the exploitation of people willing to come across the border, mostly from Mexico and Central America, and pick crops and so forth.
Mhm.
Those are the people who, raised children for other people while they were becoming doctors or became doctors themselves. We've had many successful graduates of the California university system. And suddenly, scapegoating these undocumented workers is now fashionable in certain quarters. It's
Mhm.
being hard headed. Again, going to your expertise, do you accept that maybe we're escaping a notion of freedom and responsibility? Maybe we're tired of democracy, or at least half of the people or a third of the people. Is there something alarming in that respect that this totalitarian image has now voter appeal?
Yeah, I guess I mean, that's a great, definitely provocative question. And I think I guess I would a couple things I would add, like, I mean, first, it's yeah, not only is it totally absurd, this idea that you could even have a California without immigrants. Like, this is, Los Angeles is one of the like truly bilingual cities in the country. People speak English and Spanish. Like, it's just it's so absurd. But also going back like not that much farther, and we're like, this land was Mexico. Like, we were invaders here. So it's just, there's so many layers of just absurdity and hypocrisy like baked into the current political moment. Um and then zooming out a little bit, like, and to try to tackle the question of just, is are people becoming sick of democracy? I mean, maybe that's at play to some degree, but I also think, there are weaknesses to the concepts of democracy. Like, people can be misled, people can be led astray. We're in this major inflection point where people are able to kind of like choose their own information realities, and like have uh like this concept of like fake news, real news. Like, we don't people see stuff online that's AI generated or not real, and they might believe that it is, or they like choose to only like listen to news sources that already have a particular like political slant, and that just like creates even this deeper polarization. So I think it's kind of, it's less, in my view, less that people are no longer aligned with like the concepts of democracy and kind of leadership by the people. I think it's more that like democracy has weaknesses, and during times of major like shakeups in how is distributed and people are communicating ideas, which we are definitely living through one of those times right now with just like the internet age. Um those weaknesses become more salient, and then you have situations where someone who is an authoritarian or is a kind of tyrant, or like, yeah, extreme right wing, easy to call them a fascist, like, can mislead people and draw them into a different sort of society. So I think that's kind of how I see it, although I mean, it is definitely a provocative question. Um and I think also, I guess the other thing too is like, democracy is not, it's an ideal that we strive for, but there is so much that's undemocratic about our decision making processes as a country, like the electoral college being one, the Senate, the US Senate being another, um and the like low voter turnout, like all of these things that, even though we have a ostensibly democratic system, are really undemocratic practices, and we have to um build around those and fight through them.
Well, you left out one reason why people may be turning against our political system.
Hmm.
Uh, and I, yes, it's easy to blame the media, But our media lied to us throughout our history. It lied when we had slavery and segregation. It lied when we went to war in Vietnam or Iraq. It lies about a lot of things. But the biggest lie most recently is that we are still a society of equal opportunity and fairness and so forth. And I keep
Mhm.
scratching my head because I, 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 I happen to be, my father was a German Protestant, my mother was a Lithuanian Jew. And I was born in 1936. I'm an old guy. And I went back to Germany after I went to Lithuania after the war. I tried to figure out how did this one set of relatives I have, their relative, my father came when he was quite young, like Trump's grandfather from Germany. But how did
Yeah.
these, most well educated, the highest science, the real sense of order, and in fact, anti Semitism was much lower in Germany than it was even in France and certainly in Eastern Europe. And so, what was it that caused this uh, very much admired society? And actually, the largest group of American immigrants at that point were German Americans, many of whom, half of my family, they were very confused about what was happening to their landsmen and so forth. And why were they killing? In my case, why were they? And they ended up killing all of the members of our family in Lithuania. And so the answer when I went to Germany was, well, you have no idea how bad the economic situation was. My relatives were farmers and so forth.
Mhm.
And I scratched my head because America is the most prosperous country in the world. We haven't had the Great Depression just now. In fact, when we had the Great Depression, to use this word socialism, we had somebody, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who saved capitalism from its evils,
Mhm.
at least temporarily, and was called a socialist at the time or criticized as such. But the fact is, and this is what I said was left out of your list of the
Mhm.
unhappiness there, that's the income inequality.
Yeah.
And I mean, I even feel it, and I have a good job, and so forth. But I even go to Subway, and I wonder, wait a minute, how did that cost so much?
Mhm.
And you go
Mhm.
to any other restaurants, 130 bucks, 150. What's going on here? And even people who thought they had good jobs and good income, and what has happened is that we are and I don't want to take your time here, but I'm going to get to that word socialist.
Mhm.
Because it's wonderful, by the way, for me to talk to somebody who could make a lot of money being a doctor, a
Mhm.
successful doctor, and kind of escape some of these problems that most people have. And maybe that's one reason we have expensive healthcare system. But leaving that aside, what has happened in the last 25 years or so
Mhm.
is this incredible increase in income inequality. And
Yeah.
and we so a lot of people that I know personally, they're all doing okay. They're kind of in the courtier class. They serve the super wealthy. They live in yeah near Silicon Valley. They benefit from this. But for the average American, they find everything from gas to food to their ability to travel out.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I'm turning to a very successful. You did well in the meritocracy. You're one of the winners that Trump even can't deny, you know. But you've embraced a notion of democratic socialism. We got to
Mhm.
be clear about that, but that it's needed. Maybe that's why we're such an unstable society, and maybe that's why so many people are willing to throw the idea of democracy and accountability to the public in the trash can because it
Mhm.
hasn't worked for them.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's totally the case. Totally the case. Yeah, I think a lot of people I mean, the income inequality over the last 25 years is so stark. Um and I think we've seen the rise of these just like cartoonish billionaires, you know? And I do think it's easy for people to kind of get into this headspace of like, well, I want that. Like I want that level of like wealth. And so I almost like can identify more with like these like Elon Musk, these Jeff Bezos, like these figures of a different sort of like way of living and lose track of kind of the real enemy, which is the billionaires themselves, and see instead like the opportunity to just scapegoat other people like immigrants. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge part of it is the income inequality, and then I think also the just climate crisis, the ongoing climate crisis. Like people, even if they don't actively acknowledge that we're facing environmental disaster, I think people feel it in their bones. Like they feel it regardless. This sense of just like what is like the world seems to be ending. And I think you can you wind up like narrativizing that in whatever way makes the most sense and is the easiest for you to do so, but either way you feel it. And I think that is also animating a lot of our just current political moment.
Well, the world is ending. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I mean, the statistics are startling, and if we don't get this straightened out in really what is a speck of time, maybe the next 30 years or 50 years, I mean, that used to be you would have thought somebody was a lunatic who said this could all the planet could, end. But now those are realistic figures. So if it's not
Mhm.
30, so it's 50 or something, but it's not 5 centuries or 10 centuries, and yet who managed this? This is and this is where I get, but we can't just rally around the Democratic flag, is my idea. Where,
Right.
and I'm inclined to. My God, I
Mhm.
know some of these people. I knew Clinton. I interviewed him. I mean, so I don't think he would have ordered his stormtroopers to beat up a senator, even if it was a Republican senator. I mean, there were certain manners
Yeah.
associated with both the Republicans and Democrats that that
Mhm.
that seem to be dropped now. And those
Totally up.
manners are actually reassuring to as you go about your daily life. Now we're going to have big rallies here. Well, I don't know when I'll post this. Like I'll do post it today. So tomorrow, no king rallies all over the country, and there's going to be a big one in LA. And you have to really wonder whether you could recommend. I mean, I do recommend people go to these things. Exercise your right to assemble and redress their grievances. But still, we don't know what even our own police. Forget about the National Guard, or actually supposed to be our own National Guard, but now in the hands of the federal government. And I want to get your willingness to
Mhm.
use this word socialist. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I happen to think it's a very useful word. Not that everybody who calls themselves a socialist has the answer, or every movement that is called. Some of them have been quite awful, but it's just an idea that this world that we've been celebrating of capitalism in the name of democracy has not
Mhm.
worked out very well. And I just want to bring up a point that I often bring up in these interviews. In the debate when Hillary Clinton was challenging uh, Donald Trump, and she criticized him for he's going to make America great again, and she said America has always been great.
Mm.
Now, and there, it's just the whole misunderstanding, I think, of the unhappiness of a large number of Americans. You don't have to proclaim yourself a proud boy and act in that way and look for scapegoats for your problems if you really think America is great and has always been great. The fact
Mhm.
is, people feel cheated of the image that we've been promised. So here you are, and I think it's truly admirable. You could just as easily, and not just you, anybody who's, say, a full tenured professor at a major university, they're probably making over 200,000, maybe 300. Not everybody, but a lot of them are. They make good money. They can get by. They can accept, and then they don't notice the homeless, and they don't notice people
Mhm.
who are not making a living, or so forth. But the fact of the matter is, and this change. I mean, I grew up in a working class family. I worked in different jobs, and you could make a decent living. You could have some free time. You could, even have a vacation. Those days are gone for most people.
It's
It's
true.
a, and it's a lottery now. And and
Mhm.
even this idea of a meritocracy. If you could be a very good student at some state college somewhere, and unless you happen to be in a particular, skill that is needed by Elon Musk or somebody, just being a good school teacher, or doing some other jobs effectively, being a good cook in a restaurant, that won't cut it. You're going to be miserable much of the time, and so why have you allied yourself with the labor movement is a good example. Why is that important to you? Uh,
Yeah. And I guess just one clarification. I'm not faculty at USC. I just did my residency at USC.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Well, let
just
me cop to it. I'm faculty at
okay.
USC.
um,
I'm not, fine, but that's not my point. I'm not putting down those faculty members who do make good
mhm,
money. I think they deserve it. They work hard, and so forth. I don't happen to be in that top rank, but that's fine. That's not my point. We
yeah.
have a courtier class, I call it, that caters doesn't fundamentally challenge the really wealthy, are useful to them in some way, if not other ways, just at least educating their children at the right schools or what have you. But most Americans are not in on that,
Mhm,
right? And that's, I mean, otherwise I can't understand Trump. Why
mhm,
would you want to blow up a country as clearly is happening now that
mhm,
was working for you, right? I mean, why? What is going? I mean, really, from your professional point of view, there's a
mhm,
certain, I use the word madness. Why are we? Why do we want to destroy Los Angeles
mhm,
or any city in America? Why do we want to destroy the country? I mean, hey, a lot of people eat. I mean, we have opportunities, we have good weather. What's
mhm,
going on? And it is a form. I mean, I don't have your expertise, but it seems to me again. I want to get back to, and that Eric Fromm when he talked about the escape from freedom, it
mhm,
was that people did not feel they had the power to make it better, and they were on the wrong end of it. They
mhm.
weren't getting it one way or another, and so they
Yeah.
go for a demagogue. We don't have that much time. You're very generous with your time, but let's understand. Let's try to understand not only the people who follow Trump, but Trump himself.
Mhm,
Okay, why is he not nurturing the country? Why is he not protecting it? I can understand. He took a lot of nasty shots from the Democrats. They challenged him
mhm,
on every level. They didn't give him credit for anything. But why? He's got
mhm.
children. I mean, why would you act in this irrational way?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think people I definitely don't know, but I think like one thing that I feel is relevant here is that um even though Trump and his administration's actions seem irrational, like it's kind of like a follow the money thing, right? Like right now we're experiencing these horrifying ice raids in LA. It's creating, like you said, this theatrical spectacle. It's an incredibly violent spectacle, and it's, ruining people's lives, hundreds of people's lives who have been detained and separated from their families and will be deported. Um, but it's also happening at the exact same time that they're passing this horrific budget reconciliation bill that is a major transfer of wealth from working people to the billionaire class. Like they're cutting Medicaid, they're cutting all these social services. And they're putting money into military and tax cuts for the wealthy. So it's a huge, like, historic transfer of wealth to the capitalist class. And not a coincidence that that's happening at the same time that they're creating this huge media narrative about, Democratic run cities and, violent criminal immigrants or whatever. Like it's those things are all kind of rational together. And it's just, I think it's irrational in the sense that, like, why would anyone be so evil? But I think it's not irrational in the sense of, like, they're making decisions that line their own pockets. They're making decisions that put money in their friends' bank accounts.
Yeah, but they're also making decisions that make it impossible to even go hear the symphony in LA. We have a
Mhm,
curfew. I have to get out of this office by 8 o'clock tonight. And
mhm,
and no, I want to. It's really there was a certain logic to capitalism, as Adam Smith and others defined it, of an invisible hand, of a free market, of certain efficiency, and
mhm,
okay, and we know communism and socialism can get quite bureaucratic, can become inefficient, and so forth. What is at stake here now is a level of irrationality that I think the practitioners must know. I mean, for instance, Elon Musk. He
mhm,
makes more than half of his cars in China. All right.
mhm,
he
Yeah.
knows China is not responsible for our problems. Yet
Mhm.
he's going along and financing a president. By the way, the Democrats did the same thing, who want to
Mhm.
blame all our problems on China, which actually has been quite successful in lifting, 400 million or 500 million people out of terrible poverty. But somehow they're the enemy. And if they win China, it'll be India, it'll be Brazil if they're successful. And
Mhm.
this whole weird turning against the global market, turning against trade, wanting
Mhm.
high tariffs, not just a high wall to prevent people from coming across the wall who pick your crops and clean your house and raise your children, right?
Mhm.
After all,
Mhm.
Republicans used to be for a relatively open border because they wanted to get these people to come in and work and so forth. It was the Democrats more concerned about labor unions that actually were for a tighter border. But leaving that aside, right now, you just take a figure like Elon Musk. Do you really want a war with China? I mean, and so Trump actually even seems torn, right? He wants
Mhm.
to make deals, but he doesn't want to make deals. He says he
Mhm.
doesn't want war, but he goes along with war. I get
Yeah.
back to an old thing that you don't seem to have adults watching the store. And I don't know if that doesn't fall into a traditional psychiatric framework. But the
Mhm.
one thing you thought you would have from having limits on government and right to vote, and particularly once we let women vote and so forth, and you know that there would be something like, hey, don't blow the place up, don't destroy it. I still have to take my kids to school. I still want
Yeah.
to go shopping in the morning. I still want to, not be frightened with sirens. Like we have sirens going on in LA. I live downtown, it's all night long, the
Mhm.
sirens. And then I go by the police station. That can't just play Trump. You got a wall of police around. I want to get you back to the labor union thing,
Mhm.
which is why I asked to interview you in the first place, because I think it's so refreshing that there is something of a rebirth of the labor movement, because I think the labor movement is what saved capitalism in this country, saved the
Mhm.
country from capitalism. And it was because of the Great Depression. We suddenly had the industrial workers united and the CIO and so forth. And, that's the family I come from. People could be welders, they could be machinists, make a decent living, be able to go fishing on the weekend, be able to even have a house of some
Mhm.
kind. And
Mhm.
that world has been destroyed. And the
Mhm.
reason I bring up this psychological thing, people with wealth should know clearly that this is going to hurt them. You know, it,
Mhm.
it's sort of the whole idea of philosophy, whether it's Confucius or Aristotle, is to appeal to the emperors to not, to beware that the peasants out there can rise up and kill you, and that
Mhm.
there can be chaos. There seems to be on the part of these wealthy people, yes, they want to line their pocket, but they think they can get away with it. They think there won't be chaos. And yet you look at what's happening, and all around is that people are saying, yes, you're creating chaos.
Mhm.
How short-sighted can you be? This is why I need the help of a professional. I mean, I've interviewed. So I interviewed Nelson Rockefeller and David Rockefeller. I've interviewed wealthy people, and there are people like Warren Buffett who get it, and they don't want to blow everything up. Right now, we seem to be in the hands of people who have the short term. Yes, line my pocket, get even more than I could
Mhm.
possibly ever need. So I think it's for a psychiatrist to explain.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of them are also not particularly bright, and maybe just don't see the bigger picture or aren't thinking beyond the medium term. And then I think also with the climate crisis looming, people it's like they're preparing for the end of the world and for them to be the only ones that get to survive it. Um, and just I think that's just kind of how it is. I don't think there I don't know that there's any psychiatric diagnosis that's helpful here. I think some people are just not too smart and not too kind.
Yeah, is that it, or are they just driven by some obsessive animalistic drive for power or contempt for others? It seems so often informed by hatred. Isn't that there's something? maybe we haven't always been great. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe, even if we just begin with, let's say we're just an ordinary nation. Let's
Mhm.
say we don't have the secret sauce. Then religion has told us this, philosophy, psychiatry has told us this. You have to struggle with your demons, right? You have to
Mhm.
challenge these forces that will make you destructive, right? There's part of the human experience where power and corruption and are also possible, as well as decency and so forth. That's the struggle. And right
Mhm.
now, we're accepting uh, a situation again of madness. That's the only way I can describe LA at this moment, where
Mhm.
actually intelligent, well informed friends of mine, whether they are more conservative than me or that, or so forth, actually think we could become Hitler Germany.
Mhm.
They say this over eating dinner. And I said, "Are you kidding me?" So, I mean, I visited Germany after war. I mean, I've been in totalitarian countries as a journalist. I've
Mhm.
seen what this does to people, the fear, the horror, the killing, and all that. How could we possibly just be eating our food here? And are we really? Are we really in a pre-fascist or fascist emerging situation? And if we are, how come we're just going about our normal business? Because
Mhm.
these very same people very often will blame the protesters. They'll say, "Oh,
Mhm.
look, it made me hard for me to get to work." Even on our campus, some people
Mhm.
complain, "Look what's happening here. We have this confusion, and I don't even know. And can't we just stop that?" And then the administration brought in the LAPD and arrest people and blame people for what? Speaking up for human rights, speaking up against the tyranny of power, right?
Mhm.
And so again, we get back to manners and convenience. There's a form of denial.
Mhm.
What happened when Martin Luther King condemned the United States as the major purveyor of violence in the world because of the carpet bombing of Vietnam, killing so many people. And everybody said, "Martin, get in your lane. Just talk about civil rights." Or he said, "I
Mhm.
can't do that." So I don't know. You got a few more minutes. What fascinates me about you is that you have taken time out from your careerism, maybe even challenged it a little bit. I don't know how it works,
Mhm.
but actually say, I have to do something about it. So I have to care about what are the working conditions here in LA. I mean, let's just end this by why do you care about SEIU and what it does and whether and one of its leaders is brutalized in this way or intimidated in this way. Let's just why do you have a civic obligation aside from your medicine to be involved?
Yeah, I guess, and maybe this kind of gets to why I don't feel too compelled to go down the road of like psychologically assessing our Elon Musks and our Donald Trumps, because I think it does just come down to a question of raw power, and I think when people have power, they'll try to assert it, they'll try to grow it, and I think the only force in society that is really capable of contesting um, the the way that power is distributed right now is organized workers. And I think organized workers exercising their power as workers in the workplace is the only path towards really remaking society and changing it for the better. Um, and so to me, I guess I don't even know if I would call it like a civic obligation. I think it's just like I'm not of the billionaire class. Like I'm of the working class, and whether I even if I'm like a fairly well paid worker that has some stability, like it's still, it's still my role to be a part of organizing workers to leverage our power and to fight back. So yeah, I think for me it's just kind of a material assessment of like this is the only path.
Oh no, it's more than a materials assessment because let's just finally, because I'm involved in trying to get a union at USC,
Mhm.
and I think with it's the only. Let me make a pitch for it. The only way we can continue to serve our students, because otherwise we have to listen to just trustees. We have to listen just to be, well, now in this case, Trump has really pulled one out when his humbling of Columbia and Harvard and all these schools, pointing out, hey, folks are using a lot of public money. We give you a
Mhm.
lot of big contracts, defense contracts, and everything else. You're going to do it our way, or we're going to smash you." And suddenly, oh, well, didn't you think of that before? Didn't you know that what power might corrupt? Didn't you think that you
Mhm.
maybe were selling your soul for this money? Didn't I mean, come on. What's been happening since the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement is basically we bought off the intellectual class, or the powerful people did, and they look at who was. I mean, you know. Uh, some degenerate people get chairs named after them at Harvard, right? Uh, you know, the so really, there's a big. I want to. Okay, we have just. Let me
Mhm.
just take 1 minute. I just want to understand this word greed. You know, because after all, not only every major philosophy, every major religion, everything has always warned us that there's something in the human makeup that could be terrible to the survival of the species. Something maybe that cockroaches and beetles don't have. They just go about their business and they survive a long time. Humans may have a short, relatively short span in the
Mhm.
survival of the species. And that word greed comes into it. And that in the name, that's why we have the climate crisis, right? We're
Mhm.
willing to build in any which way and destroy the air and everything to get more money into everything. So, okay, what's a positive way to think about this? Well, I mean, really, uh, will labor turn out? Will that save us here in LA? Maybe. Uh,
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, labor is fighting back really hard. I think that the labor movement is well positioned to fight back right now, and the fact that they came after a labor leader in LA, an immigrant labor leader, is an immigrant rights activist and labor leader is unacceptable, and people are ready to stand up.
Well, tell us. Well, let's end on that because he has the same name as Dolores Huerta, right? Huerta. I don't know if it's spelled the same way. David Huerta, and
Mhm.
I've always admired Dolores Huerta. I remember her from the original with Cesar Chavez and the Farm Workers Strike, everything. And one thing, and I've interviewed her a number of times, even for this show. And one thing she would always say is, I didn't cross the border. The border crossed me. My
Mhm.
family was here for whatever.
Yeah.
And the border shifted, and there is such a wisdom to that. And I know he's not related to her, but here's an example: somebody trying to improve the life of people who are on this side of the border or that side of the border, but we have a common stake. And that whether
Mhm.
you're Chinese and trying to improve your life, or you're in Brazil trying to improve, this what we have lost in this whole super nationalism of America, make America great. We think it's a zero sum game. I have to screw you, or you're going to screw me, and we have to divide it. And I thought the example of this union organizing, which in LA organizes the most vulnerable people. It's not just the top crafts, which was
Mhm.
a lot of traditional labor organizing, but people who are really exploited in the extreme, the hotel workers, and the service industries and so forth. So maybe we could end on a positive note. We got to, we'll go for 40 minutes. It's 38:20 now. Give me the sermon.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the labor movement in LA will not stand down. I think we're some of the one of the most LA is a union town. You know, we're one of the most powerful labor cities, and I think part of that is just because of the synergy between the labor movement and the immigrant rights movement in LA. And I think people are not going to stand down. People are not going to accept this kind of unjust reality. So the labor movement is going to fight back, and there's no doubt in my mind that when we fight together, we win.
On that note, and I want to thank you. I'm only here in LA because actually my mother was a garment worker and she come from Lithuania, but she came to LA in 1931 to organize workers here. It wasn't too successful. It wasn't always a labor town. The LA Times that I worked for 30 years tried to smash the union every chance it had, but now it is, and it is a very positive feeling when you realize that a lot of people around you that you run into, and that's been happening to me the last weeks, whether at the university or on the streets, we're on the same side. We just
Mhm.
don't want people bullied. And so
Mhm.
it's really quite moving. I want to thank you, Dr. Francis Gill, for taking this time and also for being a heck of a role model for people, including myself. I want to thank Joshua Shear for being our executive producer and putting this all together. Diegos Ramos, his family came from Chile after all the turmoil there, is our managing editor at Shear Post, where we run this. And who did I leave out? Max Jones, who does the video. And I want to thank the JKW Foundation as well as Integrity Media Foundation for providing funding to help us do this on a basis. And see you next time. Thanks again.